Clarke from Thrive Physical Therapy and Wellness in Richmond, Virginia, and this is Strive to Thrive, your weekly podcast designed to help improve your health, increase your success, and help you thrive in life.
My name is Cody. I'm a physical therapist at Thrive Physical Therapy, and today our primary topic is going to be about footwear and kind of what our recommendations are. We get this question quite a bit when it comes to what's the most appropriate kind of footwear, what's the best kind of shoe I should be wearing for certain activities, what's the best brand, whatever you may hear, right? So a lot of footwear questions come to physical therapists, especially at our clinic. We do work with quite a few runners here at Thrive PT. We even work with quite a fair share of triathletes. So footwear can really, I will say that footwear can help certain people, and there are certain circumstances where I highly recommend certain characteristics of footwear. For this podcast, we won't be mentioning any brands. We're not going to market anyone else's material or content on this page. So we're not going to talk about what specific kind of shoes that we recommend or talk about, but we will talk about characteristics of shoes that we think are good for people to look for in their average day footwear.
Yeah, and cover some concepts around it, around the basic idea. So couple basic thoughts on things. And my understanding of the literature and what's fairly commonly thought is that nobody has been able to definitively show that any particular type of footwear or type of footwear necessarily prevents injuries. And so the current line of thought on it is that it's really around mechanics. So in other words, foot control, running mechanics. If you're a runner, we're going to talk about running and walking. Okay, so having good mechanics. Now, having good mechanics requires mobility, strength, those sorts of things. Those things impact how well someone moves, how well someone runs, and how efficiently they do. And that has been shown to have a huge link as to and be the major differentiating factor as to why somebody stays healthy with running, with walking, whatever. And then we work back from the footwear standpoint. So, and also the other things I think it's important to distinguish between what you might do in an acute situation where something's very sensitive, where something might need a little bit of support versus what you're going to be in all the time. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And as we found, and as evidence, the evidence we read states that no amount of footwear support, no amount of different shoe, no carbon plate or coupled heel or smooth, expandable upper of a shoe is going to lead to or going to compensate for weak hips, poor ankle mobility, and poor mechanics, right? So, shoe wear is not the answer. It can be a supplementary comfort level. A lot of time we find that footwear is much more individualized than people think for a preference standpoint. I don't think there is one shoe that is necessarily better than all the others. Feet are different. Your foot's been your foot for as long as you've been born, right? So your foot's mechanics and your foot's structure and architecture is going to be different than everyone else's around you or everyone else on the planet. So there is no specific shoe that's going to fit you best, right? So that's why we can't make a recommendation based on brand. There's no reason to in the first place, because for anyone, their shoe may be someone's completely different shoe otherwise. However, when there's certain recommendations that we can make based off of your past history or certain things that you're experiencing. Sure. So one of the big ones I recommend, and then Clarke can talk more about some other features, but the biggest things that I've seen evidence-based that do support comfortable footwear, and this is primarily with walking and running, right, is particularly a wide toe box, right? So if we're looking at shoe structure that can make a difference, if you're in a shoe that's too narrow for your foot, meaning that your foot's coming off the footbed, which is the plate at the bottom portion of the shoe, then
toes are sticking off.
Yeah, if big toe or pinky toe is hanging off the edge, right? That's no good, right? From a structural standpoint, from a mechanics standpoint, that doesn't allow your foot to spread and disperse force. It creates more of a conical shape at your forefoot, which then puts more stress through your metatarsal heads and through your metatarsal joints, which are the joints from the long bones in your foot that connect to your toes, right? So you do need to have enough room for your foot to flatten out and disperse weight normally, because that's the way our feet are designed to move. That's how they've always been designed to move from an architectural standpoint.
And so to paraphrase a little bit what he's talking about is the more the shoe allows you to have efficient mechanics and function well, generally the better the shoe ends up being.
Absolutely.
And I'll give you an example. Like, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but there was a craze a little while back about minimalistic shoes and going to Vibrams and
toe shoes.
So totally flat shoes, right? And everything went to where you're supposed to kind of run in those. Well, here's the thing. Many times those type of shoes give you a lot more sensory feedback, okay? In terms of how we move and the feedback through our feet is part of what helps us produce more efficient movement, okay? Without getting too technical. And sometimes a minimalistic shoe gives you feedback from your feet, and if you don't have these big cushions under your heels, well, then you can't literally slam and land on your heels when you run. It forces you into running a different way. Well, we know that a more efficient gait pattern tends to be more landing on the entire, like more of a forefoot strike, an entire foot. Well, that's how the foot disperses shock, right? And works more efficiently. So sometimes that shoe makes it more possible to feel it, and what it does is it facilitates a change in how someone runs or moves, right? But that having been said, running, having some cushion isn't necessarily bad. And most of us didn't grow up running all over the place on dirt roads, and like it's asphalt, concrete, that kind of stuff. So most of us didn't really grow up and develop the kind of muscle control that we need to necessarily run in those. So in terms of training, maybe not, but in terms of a tool to facilitate good mechanics, that might be where you might try a different shoe for trying to make a change. So maybe you can piggyback on and try to explain better what I'm trying to explain.
Yeah, well, from a simple standpoint, are you 200 plus pounds? Are you 6 foot tall? And do you have bilateral knee arthritis? Don't run in a minimal shoe. At least not right away, right? So if you haven't been running consistently for a while, if your joints haven't gotten used to the impact of the compression and the shock of running through those positions, I highly recommend using something that will give you some support. Now, will it give you optimal running mechanics? Not necessarily. Will it give you enough comfort to get through your first mile? Probably, which I think in that regard is a victory, right? So I think you need to think about your body type a little bit. From personal experience, I've had 3 different meniscal tears over the course of my years, which means that my knees don't love a lot of loaded compression and impact, right? Just because the shock absorption in my knees is reduced, right? Now I can run with more optimal mechanics, and that will help me reduce the impact through my knee joints. So I typically trail run in more minimal shoes because I feel like I can absorb impact better that way. But if I run on asphalt, no matter with my experience, I can run with pretty good mechanics and still have decent knee pain the next day. So I run with more cushioned shoes, and I tend to reduce that. Once again, that doesn't make me better. It doesn't mean it's better. It just means that for my body, I tend to respond better with a heel strike and a cushy heel, right? A cushy shoe. Yeah. So I think it's definitely, as Clarke was alluding to, it's definitely body dependent. And I would say if you are heavier, if you do have painful knees already, minimal shoes can be a pretty rough go to start, especially so you definitely be careful of that. And coming to the acute aspect of things, for sure, when I first had my first couple meniscal tears, flip-flops were out, right? I didn't wear unsupportive sandals for a while just because the straight concrete compression, on a hard floor was quite painful, right? But once I got into more comfy shoes, I could stand longer at work, I could do more. So cushion has its place. I think cushion has a little bit more of a place when you're doing something that's less dynamic. So say my job is primarily standing on long, hard surfaces for long periods of time, then absolutely use cushion. We all recommend you sit down, move, walk, do exercise to compensate for long standing before you rely on just a shoe. But, as a compensation, it's I think a good one to make.
What do you think is good advice in regards to what are your opinions of orthotics, and what do you think is good sound general advice?
Yeah, so when it comes to orthotics, the way I prescribe people to get orthotics is typically in an acute situation. So we talk about if someone's actively having issues with, say, plantar fasciitis, or they're dealing with an active, currently inflamed medial arch, or inside of your ankle joint because you're collapsing pretty regularly through exercise. And I can usually suggest a temporary orthotic if necessary to just reduce pain. But in that regards, it's simply a pain management tool for me. I don't typically recommend wearing it long term. I don't want people to have to use it for a long period of time as a compensation. I want people to be able to use it as an adjunct instead of taking pain medicine, right? Maybe you can use this, arch support with a cushion shoe to help give you a little bit more pain relief. Should be how I recommend.
Yeah. So for sure, and I think that completely sound. I think in general, they're overprescribed, and I think in general they're prescribed as like a long-term thing. And in this instance, it's like something to help you get over an acute stage again. But really the key is to optimize whatever your mechanics will allow. So in other words, trying to get people to where they're more often barefoot, less support, because that's a situation where you can actually work on exercise and corrective work so that you develop the kind of foot control and muscle control. We know that just like being sort of barefooted and walking on grass and doing different things, and in general, that's a very, very good idea, because what that actually does is stimulates nerve receptors in the feet, helps you to develop muscle control in your ankle and your foot, which helps your mechanics. And then the idea would be you maybe support yourself with the orthotics initially, but then wean off of it, develop the muscle control that you don't need them long term.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. I mean, I think it's like everything. I usually equate it back to an ankle brace. Right? So a lot of people have rolled their ankles. Initially, you're given an ankle brace to help reduce some of the swelling and give you stability while your ankle heals. Right? But the long-term suggestion, especially from a physical therapist standpoint, is not to wear the ankle brace longer than you have to. It's a temporary crutch to give you some support and give you some to reduce some of the swelling, keep some compression on it while it's healing. I would say that orthotics would be similar to me in regards to if you give someone support in their shoe, all right, maybe they feel okay, but you're artificially supporting their arch. So there's muscles on the bottom of your feet called your foot intrinsics. There's quite a few. But they actually create the shape of your foot. So the muscle tone, that static tone of your foot, creates a little bit of an arch. Now, people have higher arches than others. We see that quite a bit. But one way you can support the arch that you've developed over time is by giving those muscles more activity and making them more responsive. So that's why we recommend barefoot walking in a non-acute setting, meaning I don't have pain. I should be practicing barefoot or minimal shoe walking throughout my day often, because that's going to help get those foot muscles a little bit stronger, make them more responsive, make them fire a bit quicker in response to stimulus. So if you can do that as a long-term strategy, you'll actually have a less chance of plantar fasciitis. You'll have less chance of internal foot stress, and then you'll have more support internally in your foot, so you won't have to rely on expensive orthotics or custom-made, fabricated, $2,000 carbon foot plates.
So I have another question for you, because I see this a fair amount, and I have some opinions on this for sure. What about that real high arched foot? Because I see that get put in orthotics a lot too. So tell me your thought process, because people land in different buckets, right?
Right.
Some people got the bigger flat feet. Yeah. Some people talk about the high arch person.
Yeah.
That's another one. To me, that's a dilemma
that needs to be happening a lot. Yeah, and I completely agree. So you have your high arch person who comes in, right, with typically now they could have poor foot mechanics that aren't associated with their arch whatsoever. So it could be bad ankle range of motion, poor foot control, ankle controls limited, things like that, which I think a lot of times contributes to a high arch issue that causes pain, right? Because when I tell people your foot is your foot, right? So if you have a flat foot or a high arch foot, the idea is, and with evidence is shown over and over again, is you do not want to try to change the foot. So if I have a very high arch, I do not want to try to flatten it out. If I have a very low arch and a very flat foot, I don't want to try to build it up to make it much of a higher arch. Right? There's no ideal foot position. We just know that your foot's architecturally designed in the way that it's been since you've been born, right? And everything in your body is adapted to that foot. So your tibias, your shin, your knee joints, your hip joints, even your back and your waist have all been configured over time to adjust for that foot. So I do agree with supporting a high arch foot at times if that's something that people really, really desperately need. I think putting a reasonable arch in a very high support can help reduce pain for sure. I think it's a viable option initially. But just like everything, I feel like if you can give people ankle control and you can prevent them from substantially collapsing on that high arch, doing some of the other mechanisms, maybe strengthening up the hips, focusing on what we call foot stacking, which is just a really good mechanism for you to learn how to load your feet well and find different positions on your feet and distribute weight evenly throughout your foot, then I think you can make great strides in that before you go to these huge orthotics that give you a quarter-inch lift in your medial arch to try to support.
Yeah. And I think the key there is really working with and optimizing whatever your structure is and getting the most out of what you're physically capable of from a mobility and strength standpoint. And then if you need to create some support early stages to get to a certain place, or if you find you need to create a little support down the road, that's a good thing. But I also think there's such thing as giving someone an orthotic way soon in the process, where now you haven't changed anything and you're trying to buttress up from underneath this orthotic. It's just not going to happen. I think it's not a realistic thing. So I just think it's gone to way too frequently. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times the answer, it depends, right, on what's happening in the scenario. And that's the key is figuring it out. Yeah. But a lot of times your high arch foot person, gaining mobility in your ankle and calf and your foot structure, like you can actually gain motion and help someone change and get rid of symptoms, and the foot sort of looks the same. So I think it's all in knowing what to do when and how.
Yeah, I do think, and I don't like to use the word short-sighted often, but I do think if you're looking at addressing a foot using arch supports or using external support, I feel like a lot of the time you're seeing an issue, right? Which if you look at, the most normal, the feet, whatever that means, I don't really have a standard to compare that to. If you have a moderate arch and you see outliers on both sides, it's easy to say, ooh, I want to make that look like the middle ground, right? I want to bring that up, I want to pull that down, I want to do whatever I can. But I think the problem with that is, you are going to mess up structures above and below the chain when you do that. Like you're going to get different changes in your body, and some of them may be very maladaptive. It'd be not uncommon to try to really buttress someone's arch up, especially with a flat foot, which I highly don't recommend, and then have someone all of a sudden start to have lateral knee pain or outside knee pain as a result, because now they're in a completely different position, right? And their body's not designed for that. They've grown to adapt to their body, and that's something you have to accommodate. So that's something that I always at least follow.
Yeah, and there's very good ways to figure out all that, kind of where things need to go. I think the key conception, what I like to think of it is whatever assistance and orthotic and whatever you use, it's kind of a means to an end. It's not relied on as this is the solution. Oh, well, okay, we're going to solve it with these orthotics. Well, right. No, that's part of the continuum of what you right. do, and it's really around good analysis and kind of figuring out what's going on. Well, that's part of the art of it, I guess.
Well, I think simplicity states that that's been their issue for a while. Why do they currently have pain, or why do you currently have pain, right? A lot of time, unless there's some kind of traumatic insult, which typically there's not, it's usually repetitive. Right? You have to figure out why did that repetitive stress now, since you've had this foot and this high of an arch for years and years and years, why does it result in pain? Now, maybe you've had a change in activity, maybe you upped your running, maybe you've done these things. Typically, that is a problem that's a result of a mobility deficit or a control deficit well before it's a structural deficit at your foot. I mean, I very rarely see the outliers are there that it is a structural problem, and you may need surgical intervention or severe, some orthotic implementation. But I would say 90% plus of the time, it's a mobility deficit, strength deficit, mechanics deficit that can be changed, and the foot feels fine. Right? Yeah. Or you can, over time, get it back to where it should be.
Yeah, many times the foot's not even it. It's not the foot at all. It's the hip. It's the trunk. It's the back. Right. Like a back issue that leads to a foot issue, or a knee issue or whatever. Sometimes the foot is the primary, but many times it's secondary to whatever's happening, right. And that's kind of trying to figure it out. So anyway, it's
fun part of PT.
Yeah, it's part of the puzzle. Right? It's part of the puzzle. Yeah. So that's the beauty of it, and that's part of what makes it really fun to help people. That also can be frustrating because the thing that you were hoping was just a foot issue, well, no, it's really a hip and a low back issue. And sometimes that can be frustrating to hear, but that's also the way that you actually get rid of it long term. You got to kind of figure that piece out.
Yeah, I'd say in the grand scheme of things, expensive orthotic and a lack of progress is usually more frustrating than working on a different area but seeing results, right? So we like to.
There you go. You hit it on the head right there.
Yeah,
so it's like whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever works. Get it back running, right? So that's the good news. I think kind of big takeaways from today's talk, right? I know we kind of talked a little bit about foot mechanics, a little bit about barefoot principle, a little bit about different shoe styles. So I'll talk briefly on our shoe recommendations, and you can fill in on some of the barefoot principle and foot structure.
Your top few tips. So
you
get it going and then I'll go.
So if I'm looking at shoe wear, right, there are a couple things I do like. So I do like a wide toe box. When I say toe box, I just mean the forefoot of the shoe, so the front part of the shoe should have some width to it, right? It should never be narrow. So if you have a particularly wide foot, you really have to focus on getting a shoe that's wide enough to support that. There are shoe brands that do have shoe sizes with wide or W on the end of them, which means
a couple or not.
Yeah. So New Balance is one that I usually recommend. Ultra is the other shoe company that's made a big marketing standpoint on how wide their toe box is. I would almost say comically wide.
That's my running shoe, by the way. But I actually do like them.
I've run in them too. They're great. They feel good. I do like that, and I love that wide toe box. They've really taken that evidence-based study and run with it and done some pretty cool things for the shoe market with that. Once again, doesn't mean that's the perfect shoe. It just means
Correct.
it's a shoe that we like to, to wear. And if someone needs a wider toe box, or they have a very wide foot, I can happily recommend use a New Balance or Ultra as a result for them, just to start looking. And then I would say, depending on what you've had done in the past and how your body is proportioned, right, there might be a certain standard for cushion versus not, right? So I would say if you're on the heavier side of things, you've had knee injuries in the past or dealing with arthritis in either hips, knees, or ankles, there's nothing wrong with having some cushion, especially if it's your daily walker. It's something that you can benefit from and makes you more comfortable. By all means, use it. I will say there's typically a downside to too much cushion or excessive cushion, and that's you lose foot mobility and you lose contact with the ground, which doesn't allow your foot to act as normally as it should. But at the same time, if you're just walking from office space to office space on hard ground, it might be worth it for you. And the last thing I would say is just when you're looking for footwear, this is kind of a personal plug, but don't get swept up in the big brand names. Don't get swept up in, looking at all the big trends. There's a lot of shoe technology out there that I would say is probably minimally impactful for your life, right? You'll see a lot of the decoupled heels and airbags in the foot plates and
See the shock.
Yeah, the Nike shocks and all that stuff. And you'll see all this stuff, and they support different things. And I would say a lot of that's minimally impactful on your life, right? So just look for a shoe that fits well. I think that's primarily what matters. If it fits well, then that's a great starting spot. And then from there, you can just look for shoes that feel more cushiony or have a little bit more cushion versus a minimal overlap.
That's great. Great advice. So the couple of my little take-home things that I would say around that is, one, if you happen to be in the category of having problems with foot, ankle, whatever, I would encourage getting it checked out. But look at it a little more globally. Like, figure out why that's there. Don't rule out the fact it could be knee, could be hip, could be trunk, there's multiple things that can impact the foot. The foot can impact other things. So getting that figured out in a detailed way, looking at the whole picture is key. Second, work on working with your nature and your physiology. So lots of times it's strength, it's mobility, it's all these other things before you try to go to some other supportive thing. And then one way to do that is actually by working on getting yourself into a situation where you're doing some barefoot walking. Now, a good place to start that would be on grass, something that's not overly hard or abrasive or whatever, and you just start to walk a little bit in grass. That gives you feedback to your feet. That's been shown to start to wake up some of the neural and muscular support systems in the ankle foot. That's a very healthy thing to do. So we actually like to encourage people towards being in bare feet as much as they can. That's how we train balance. There's lots of things where being barefooted is not something you want to stay away from. You want to move towards, but you also have to be respectful of where your tissues are and the surfaces you're on and those sorts of things. If you never go barefooted and you have a foot issue and it's painful, well, you're not going to necessarily start walking around your house, your hard floor in your house, or all over outside without some sort of protection. So be smart as to how you do that. But in general, that is one segue to working with your nature, improving whatever you have, and waking things up, and kind of take that approach on things. So, working towards being in a more barefoot situation is a very kind of good way to go, depending on where you're at. So,
absolutely, yeah. So that's kind of our topics, or that's kind of our thoughts on shoe wear. So we definitely want your questions. If you come into physical therapy to see us, or if you go to any physical therapist, depending on where you are, definitely ask some questions about footwear, because your foot may be in a particular situation that they may have recommendations for you based off the structure of your foot. And that's usually up to a PT or an orthotist to kind of determine whether or not you need a specific kind of shoe or kind of footwear to accommodate for you. So leave that in kind of mind, leave that in the hands of professionals if you're doing some of these, if you're looking at specialty within their specialty shoes. But outside of that, we kind of have a strong stance on the opinion, so please leave some comments below. Let us know what you guys think. Let us know if there are certain shoes that you love or that have really changed your life around for how much you can do. We'd be happy to hear it. Or if you have any other questions, about certain shoe wear or any other thing that we haven't addressed in this topic, please leave a comment below, and we'll try to get back with you with some information. So thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate it. This has been your Strive to Thrive podcast, and hopefully look for some more content next week.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.